When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is sponsored by Codify, a California benefit corporation. Visit Codify at www.codifi.com.
Ancient tools and burials, plants and seeds, neanderthals.
Welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast, episode 71. I'm your host, Serra Head, with my co-hosts today, Ken Fader and Jeb Card. And today, we're talking about images of New World corn at Roslin Chapel. Are there really images of corn carved into the Roslin Chapel windows? If so, how did they know what it looked like, since corn wasn't introduced into the country until nearly 60 years later? Did Henry Sinclair possibly bring corn back with him when he was discovering the New World? Or is it possibly misidentified and simply decorative?
But we don't do dinosaurs.
Get ready to think critically.
No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and I am joined today with my co-hosts, Ken Fader and Jeb Card. How's it going, guys?
Awesome. Reporting for duty here.
Yep. Preparing to go to the Society for American Archaeology meetings, where Ken and I and other people you've heard on this show and probably people you will hear on this show will have an entire session devoted to archaeology and new and alternative religious movements, which is a lot of what we talk about on this show.
I'm looking forward to it.
Should be lots of fun.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what you guys do with it.
I'm looking forward to it as well.
So today, speaking of kookiness and alternative religion stuff,
this would fit in. This fits in.
We are going to talk about two seemingly unrelated topics, one of which is corn, aka maize, and how it got to where it was. And we're going to bring that around to the Roslin Chapel as well, which, if anybody is aware briefly, the Roslin Chapel, made famous by Dan Brown, of course, is where the Holy Grail is, right, Ken?
That's my understanding, and I think we should get like some funding to go there and dig the place up and find it.
Oh, that'd be amazing, actually.
Whatever it may be, yeah.
But what is the Roslin Chapel? It's a real place. It was really built by real people. It's still around today. You can still go see it. But what's the hype around the Roslin Chapel, Ken?
Well, the hype that we're focusing on here is the fact that there's a claim made, and you can even find it on their website, the Roslin Chapel website.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I know. I was surprised to see it there.
I wasn't.
Has amazing carvings on the interior, and a lot of the carvings relate to plant life. So the designer of that chapel decided to include a lot of imagery, a lot of stone imagery of plant life. And I think it's one of the windows on the kind of the interior, there's this weird looking crop that people have said, you know what, that looks a lot like American Indian corn, like maize. There's also a claim that aloe, which I guess is also a New World crop, is carved into some of these window treatments. And before we just jump into where the hell does that all come from, there are just two things I want to preface this story with. And the first is, and this is something that we've been talking about again and again and again. And this morning I was thinking of saying, well, do we sound like a broken record? And I wonder for how much longer that metaphor is going to make any sense to anybody, you know, because there are no records anymore.
No,
so at some point,
vinyl's back.
Yeah, vinyl's back.
Yeah, well, so maybe so. So if you know what you are, so you guys all have to know what a broken record is. You know, it skips and it keeps repeating the same thing over and over again. Do we sound like that? As an archaeologist, the three of us as archaeologists demand physical archaeological evidence in testing hypotheses about what happened in the past, when did it happen, how did it happen? And people sometimes are surprised. They'll go, why don't you accept these other kinds of data? I said, for God's sake, we're archaeologists. This is what we do. That shouldn't be surprising to you.
Well, you know what I think, Ken? Here's what I
Yeah.
think, Ken. I think doctors should stop using blood pressure meters. They've used them 3 or 4 times, and that's boring now.
So
They should stop taking temperatures with thermometers because, I mean, that's just been done.
Right, and it's not terribly exciting. It's not terribly mysterious. So
So
who
we
cares,
just shouldn't do it anymore. Yeah.
I think
guess
it's so. Hey, we're in
Well-
season 3 of this podcast. People obviously see some kind of value here.
Let's hope, absolutely. But you know but that is the issue. People say, well, but there are these artistic depictions, or if you read this the right way, you could interpret it to mean, yeah, okay, that's all interesting. That's an interesting way of developing a hypothesis. But ultimately, the gold standard has got to be data. Has got to be physical evidence.
Yeah.
For us, when we're talking about the movement, and listen, archaeologists understand that plants and animals become domesticated, and those domesticates move, that people outside of the ranges where these things were originally domesticated find value in that, and it's traded. There's transportation of these materials. And so, for example, corn, which we'll talk about the real deal behind corn, which was domesticated in Mesoamerica. It's a tropical species. We find it in North America, a few thousand years after it's domesticated originally in Mesoamerica, and clearly it moved into those areas. But we know this because of botanical specimens. Archaeologists find corn kernels sometimes in coprolites. We find corn cobs in archaeological context, stratigraphic context. That's how we know corn was present in New Mexico 3,500 years ago, and not before that, because we don't find any physical evidence for it. So I don't want to spoiler alert, there's no physical botanical evidence at any archaeological site in Scotland that indicates that corn was there much before the early 16th century, much before Columbus, brought back corn in the late 1400s.
I want to slightly undercut that, but also then undergird it at the same time. Because iconography can, if you understand what you're looking at, be evidence of something. I mean, if somebody makes a thing for real reasons, I mean, yes, there's graffiti that people draw, even then they have reasons, but if you're spending a lot of time building a thing, there's probably a decent reason for that. But one, you have to understand what the hell you're looking at, which is usually the problem we have, is that people don't. And secondly, I would consider it very low level evidence, extremely low level evidence.
Exactly.
Agreed.
And that's the thing. You're talking about like corn after Columbus. Well, one, we start to find it in botanical remains and genetic evidence in the old world after 1492, where we don't have it before. 2, they talk about it in historical records. And 3, they then draw like fairly decent depictions of it within, at most, a couple of decades. And they're also talking about it. And we also eventually end up with actual material. That's multiple lines of evidence. And the iconography is frankly the weakest. I work in Mesoamerica, and there's been a long debate for a long time about whether the great city of Teotihuacan, what its role in the Maya classic was. Because people recognized a while ago there was iconography in the Maya region in the classic period that looked like Teotihuacan stuff, especially the god Tlaloc, the rain god, with these big Google eyes and stuff. And when it was just that, or when it was just Kaminalhuyu with pottery and very small amounts of pottery and a few bits of green obsidian from Pachuca, there was a legitimate question: was this influence, or was it invasion, or something in between? And we even know that there are depictions that look like that after Teotihuacan fell. So people were drawing it, like people were drawing Romans after Rome fell. Right. Now we've got historical records from the Maya region that suggests there may have been something more like a military intervention. And even then, the nature of it is debated. That is already stronger than just finding pictures of Tlaloc. Right. Iconography can be part of the equation, but it's way, way down the list.
Right.
Absolutely. And, it's even true that you can go to northern New Mexico, and there's a place called Crow Canyon, which is not the Crow Canyon Archaeological Center in Colorado. And Crow Canyon in New Mexico is called by the Navajo Denita. So it's kind of it's the place where they say they originated. And there's a lot of rock art there. And there's this beautiful panel, petroglyph a really finely rendered version of a corn plant. And anybody looking at that would say, you know what, that looks a hell of a lot like a corn plant. Now, it's not a big stretch to say, well, yeah, the Navajo were planting corn, because we have secure archaeological evidence that they were doing so. But it's the old Carl Sagan line, extreme claims require extreme levels of proof. I don't need extreme levels of proof that that image was a corn plant, because I know the Navajo were planting corn. If you find corn in a chapel in Scotland that dates to 50 or 60 years before Columbus, that's kind of an extreme claim, and we need more than simply that image. Forget for a moment the fact that, well, it doesn't really quite look like corn anyway. So that's
well, and that's the problem that you're hitting. That's the other problem, is when people draw images or create images or carve images, and Roslin Chapel is an excellent example of this, they have artistic license to depict them in any way they choose, and how they see them when they're carving them or painting them or however is not how we are interpreting them right away. We talked about this with the Hairy Man episode. Right. And so these images that may or may not look like corn around the Roslin Chapel window, I mean, it doesn't look like corn to me. It looks like decorative wood fixtures, and that's what I thought it was at first.
I think they look like zippers. I think
well, yeah, and Jeb thinks they look like zippers.
I think that they are evidence that the Illuminati and the Templars are covering up ancient Atlantean zipper technology to benefit button makers. That is my belief. And I frankly think it is unshakable.
Personally,
I still think you should make a video on that.
We have to go back and rewrite the history books that, at least, the part of those history books that relate to zipper technology.
Zipper technology. Well, yeah, it's been around since the Roslin Chapel times.
There's actually it's actually really easy to get vegetative stuff because it's often very fluid and it can be depicted in a lot of ways. There was a post on IO9, which was the Gawker Network's, or is the Gawker Network's, sci-fi and fantasy and hey, everybody, buy your Star Wars shit here blog. And not that I'm cynical about consumerism or anything, but they had a post by Jess Nevins on November 26, 2010. Why is Cthulhu on this 300-year-old gravestone? And we'll put this in our show notes. And there is an octopus face-looking side thing to it. And I used to blog at a place called Miskatonic Museum when I was thinking about this idea of looking at like sort of Lovecraftian stuff in archaeology and science. And I had to make a, quote, sympathetic response, why Cthulhu isn't on that gravestone. And I went and did a bunch of research into the kinds of artwork and iconography that are found on these. And that was also vegetative. I mean, that's just, it's a very similar sort of thing. Again, I'll send this to you, but we'll look at that in the show notes as well.
Right. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, okay, so archaeologists, we're looking for paleobotanical specimens. We need something in the archaeological record, stratigraphic context, in order to show that a crop has moved, whether it's 100 miles from its source area or across the globe. The other thing, and this is the thing, let's get rid of this immediately. If you go online and look and just Google, corn outside of America before Columbus, what happens is a lot of folks find historical documents in which the word corn is used relating to crops in Europe before the Columbus voyages. And folks need to understand that word is a generic term for cereal crop as far as Europeans are concerned. I think it's German with a K. Yeah. So barley corn, einkorn is a kind of wheat. So that
and then it went into English with a C. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when Europeans came to the New World and they saw this, and each Indian group had its own name for it, and the Europeans didn't, well, what the hell do we call it? They used a generic term, corn. And that corn didn't mean just that. Corn, wheat is corn, barley is corn, oats and rye are corn, and this weird thing that grows on cobs, we're going to call that corn. So when you see references to corn before Columbus in Europe, they're not talking about maize. Maize, I think maize is a Taino or Arawak Indian word through Spanish. And so that some of it got changed, but so that refers directly to this New World crop. Yeah. But so don't say, oh my God, we have found proof here in this written document that there was corn somewhere else.
I remember having that exact same reaction, and then I grew up. And I'm not joking. Like I remember as like being very young and seeing them like, and then I did a tiny bit of research, and this was pre-internet. It's like, oh, that's what that means. But then a lot of people are lazy, so they believe that Nicolas Cage is a vampire and that like there are photos of time travelers. And I might want to rant about the Mandela effect again. Anyway. So back to it.
Yeah, but so that's the deal. You actually will find a whole bunch of folks on kind of these fundamentalist Christian blogs talking about that the Bible says corn. How is that possible? And not even remembering, of course, that's a translation from Paleo Hebrew, isn't it? So how we get corn in the Bible, that's another issue entirely. So anyway, so back to the Roslin Chapel, and I mentioned this to Jeb yesterday. The story of how we get corn to the Roslin Chapel is like a Rube Goldberg mechanism. Those weird, wacky machines in which there are these bizarre individual like subroutines, all to accomplish something that's really mundane, like
they sometimes make car commercials now with those things.
Yeah, so there's you turn a crank and that kicks a boot and that puts a ball down a long channel and that channel knocks over pins. It goes on and on and on. The story of corn.
By the way, that's how I got this job. It was that kind of a career path. That's how I got it.
Is that right? Well,
you had to
absolutely
kick a ball bearing down a path.
No, maybe a metaphor, but anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, so the deal is this all actually kind of starts in 1558 when a Venetian gentleman, his name is Niccolo Zeno, publishes a document that he says he found in on the family estate, and that this document was a series of letters written back and forth between two of his ancestors, one also named Niccolo and the other Antonio, the brothers Niccolo and Antonio Zeno, and that this supposedly dates to the late 14th century. So 1380, 1385, 1390, 1400, right in around there.
Were they 14th century supervillains? Because that's a supervillain name. I'm just saying. That's pretty awesome.
Could be, yeah. Listen. We could enter this into the Marvel universe, could we not?
I think there actually is a Baron Zemo with an
all
M
right.
there. So
all right.
I don't know that, but I could be wrong.
Listen, Jeb, in this story, changing names and changing letters here and there, that's part of the whole deal. Because here's what happens, right? Here's the deal. So he publishes this, and what it's about, if you read it, it's not terribly long. It's about 7,000 words. And it's about these nautical exploits of his two ancestors who hook up with this prince whose name is very strange. It's Zichmni, Zichmni. No idea where that comes from. No idea exactly how to pronounce that. But they hook up with him, and there's a whole bunch of swashbuckling voyages, mostly in the North Atlantic. So, and there's a map that's part and parcel of this, a really interesting map. And on the map and in the description, it's pretty clear there's Greenland. There's also Iceland, although none of these things go by their normal names. And then there are a series of other islands which do not exist. If you go online today and people have to try to justify that because they want this narrative to be true, they say, oh, those islands, they all are now underwater. So it's another like mini Atlantises where there were little civilizations here, but no, they're all gone.
Where they use zippers.
Where they use zippers.
More than likely. So clearly the narrative is very vague. It's very general, and you know what? A lot of it, if not all of it, is bullshit. Because islands that do exist aren't on the map. Islands that don't exist are on the map. And when they land, very conveniently, when they land on islands, there are natives there who don't speak a language intelligible to them. But in almost every instance, there is one person on the island who actually speaks Latin. Oh, yeah, because he's a European. He got there years ago, and now he's the chief. And he has a whole library of Latin books. That's convenient. They land on one island where the primary subsistence food is human flesh. So they're cannibals. That's what they eat. And they capture half of these guys in the Zeno voyage, the Zeno and Zichmni's guys. They capture them and eat them. But our heroes teach them, because they're living on an island and it's never occurred to them that maybe they could eat fish. They teach them how to fish, and they make nets for them. No, it really is kind of absurd.
I thought you were going to say that they were trapped in a cave by a cyclops.
No, not yet.
Was there a golden fleece somewhere there too?
Here's the deal, and I kind of buried the lead here. This is in 1558. This thing is published. Nobody says anything. There's nothing in there about traveling to North America. There's nothing like in the Norse sagas where you could follow the story geographically and say, well, it is conceivable that they made it as far west as North America. There's nothing like that at all. But here's what I mean by burying the lead. If you read the entire narrative, at the very end, there's an epilogue written by the younger Niccolo Zeno. And I will see if I can find the epilogue right now. And here it is. He says, all of these letters were written by Antonio to Carlo, his brother, and I, Niccolo the Younger, that's the guy who was publishing in 1558, am grieved that the book, meaning the narrative, and many other writings on these subjects have, I don't know how, come sadly to ruin. For being but a child when they fell into my hands, I, not knowing what they were, tore them in pieces as children will do, and sent them all to ruin. A circumstance which I cannot now recall without greatest sorrow. Do you understand what's going on here? So this guy is admitting right up front, by the way, I found this when I was a kid. I tore it all up. So what I've just given you here, I remembered it.
Now, when is that guy writing? When is that guy exist?
Niccolo?
Yeah.
This
the
is
younger.
1558.
Oh, so after Columbus.
Oh yes, it's 50 years. It's 60 years after Columbus.
I see. That's very. So what you're saying is that they're in the same library. Before we go to break, by the way, I believe that you can find this a couple places. Jason Colavito, I think, has put it all on his website. I think that's one of the places you can find it.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is that the Zeno manuscript is in the same library as the Book of Zion and the Nakal tablets and the Necronomicon, also known as Al-Azif, and the King in Yellow, and let's see, the Emerald Tablet of Tot, and the Book of Tot.
That's a hell of a library.
That'd be, well, it's back at my house. I don't have it here. I don't have it here at the office because, there's rules about that sort of thing, but about keeping too many esoteric, potent, magical books in one place. So it's in that library, and I shouldn't make fun because I would say the Nakal Tablets of Mexico, but the four of them are sitting behind me on the shelf, as we talked about before.
All right, well, let's go to break. And when we come back, if Jeb hasn't been reduced to a pile of goo by all of the objects in his room, ashes,
goo tempered with ashes.
We're going to keep up on the discussion about the correlation of corn and just weirdness. All right.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Hey everyone, and we are back, and we are still talking about the Roslin Chapel and corn.
The Zeno
and the Zeno brothers. Yes. Yeah, but so
the infamous Zeno brothers.
So here's the thing that we've kind of talked around is maize. Maize is a food that was cultivated in the Americas.
It originates in Mexico.
Yeah, in southern. The South America area,
southwestern Mexico. It is derived from a grass called teosinte, Teosinte, and you can still see that today. And you can see kind of the resemblance, but teosinte has tiny little kernels and tiny little bits that remind you of like the silk and the husk of corn. But corn today is a mutant. It is
Right.
it's an artificial mutant. It is much, much bigger, and it took a really long time. Corn, there's been a long debate about exactly where. You can find teosinte in the Balsas region of Guerrero and other parts of southwestern Mexico. But the best study of it was of domestication over the long term was done in the 1960s by Richard Scotty McNeish in the Tehuacan Valley. And that's where we have a lot of evidence, but that is later, and it is not where corn appears to have been domesticated. Teosinte is not found there. It does appear to be in the Balsas region, and probably the oldest site where we actually have phytoliths, which are little mini fossils from you can basically dig up soil and look for microscopic fossils of bits of a plant, is from a place called it's a rock shelter from Guerrero, Xiahuatochtla, and that goes back to about 8,700 years ago that they may have been grinding up very early domesticated corn. We definitely have it by about 6,500 to 7,000 years ago. There's a corn cob at Guianaquit's Cave in Oaxaca. It takes a long time to get to something that you would experience as corn versus teosinte. And it's a different kind in some ways of process than in, say, wheat in the old world, although not as different as you might think. But it doesn't immediately transform things into farming. Like people start messing with this, probably because they were already just living around it and collecting it, and modifying it once they start, that gets complicated. But it's not until about 4,000 years ago that we start to see really serious, settled, substantial agricultural lifestyle in Mesoamerica. So it's not like, oh, we domesticated corn and within 200 years we've got big villages. No, it's a long-term process of people that are adding this as well as other domesticates. I mean, it's not the oldest domesticate. There's squash and other things, adding these and spending more time on them and slowly changing their lifestyle. We see this in other parts of the world, not on quite the same scale, where it's not just yesterday we do this, today we do this kind of thing.
That's one of the problems is that people are familiar with the term agricultural revolution, and that may bring up pictures in their minds of something that happens really fast. It is a very slow revolution throughout most of the world.
Yeah, and while ultimately the amount of energy that is captured by, basically what agriculture is for people is it's kind of an artificial way of creating dense resources, because you can find in the archaeological record and the ethnographic record people who we consider hunter-gatherers, people that are collecting their food, hunting their food, gathering their food, fishing their food without domesticating. Domestication, by the way, is screwing with the sex lives of plants and animals, basically modifying them genetically through artificial selection until they really can't reproduce in the form that they are without human help. That's the sort of core textbook definition of domestication. But you have complex societies that are not dependent on agriculture in the archaeological ethnographic record. You have the Kwakwaka'wakw, also known as the Kwakiutl, of where we're going this week, of Vancouver Island, of British Columbia, that had complex class-based societies based on salmon, because there's dense resources of salmon and other resources. And often the people that become agriculturalists were already complex, not building giant cities and states, but not roving the landscape with, very few material culture. There's usually something in between. And agriculture usually ends up being a supplement to that. And over time, people get kind of addicted because it allows you to recreate the idea of naturally dense. Like, what if we could make salmon dense like that everywhere? That would, in essence, be what domestication would do for you.
Right.
Now and corn, we call it corn. It should be called maize.
Right.
Yeah,
maize,
Zea maize is the scientific name.
Right, and maize spread across. It came up from the south and went across North America. I'm not sure if it made it all the way coast to coast, but I know it made a good way.
But the West Coast is primarily, because it's a lot of nice resources, is mostly hunting gathering, although I'm not a West Coast archaeologist, so I don't want to say that with 100% certainty. But generally, we talk about California and the Pacific Northwest as these complex societies based on hunting and gathering. It does go on to the eastern woodlands. It spreads much earlier into South America. We have very early evidence for phytoliths almost as old as in the Balsas. of corn in Panama, and not too much later we find it in northern Colombia and northern South America, and way earlier than we find it in North America, we find it in Peru.
Right, and it spreads very quickly, both here in the New World where it was domesticated originally, and then once it gets over into the Old World, as Jeb was pointing out earlier, it spread very quickly. So corn is one of those crops that's like really cool. Everybody liked it, so everybody just started eating it. There's some funny stories about when it first got introduced into England and Europe, about how people were actually suffering from malnutrition because they were eating too much corn.
Well, that's the problem, is you need when it really takes off, when you start to see it have a lot more impact, is when people figure out how to make it the three sisters, where you have corn, beans, and squash, because beans help rejuvenate the soil and add nutrients and amino acids that are not found in corn. And then squash helps plant these by sort of protecting, especially since this is coming from sort of arid parts of Mexico, it helps keep the sun off and kind of conserve water around the roots and soil. Once you've got the three sisters, as it was called by people like the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois of Eastern North America, you have a really viable agricultural mix.
Right. And corn is an incomplete protein.
Yes,
so you're missing amino acids that, but wonderfully, adding beans to that diet completes the protein.
And keep in mind, most cultures were not just eating beans and rice. They had other food substances that they mixed into their diets along with beans and rice. However, or corn and beans. But these are staple foods that are incredibly important to the cultures. And pretty much anywhere that you see corn introduced and adopted by a culture, you see that it becomes, as Jeb was saying, it was a symbol of status. I want to say the Navajo.
Life.
Yeah, in life. Like the Navajo, I'm really hoping I'm saying this right. The Navajo had 4 different colors of corn, and each color represented a different element. And this powder that they would make from the corn was very important to their religious ceremonies. And you see that pretty much anywhere where a food substance like corn gets introduced, which comes back to my point about corn in Roslin Chapel and images of corn, supposed images of corn elsewhere in the ancient world that was not the Americas, because there are claims that corn was being traded by transoceanic travelers long before the coming of Columbus, and that would have had to have happened for there to be the images of corn in the Roslin Chapel as well. But when we start looking at these images, we find that they are not depictions of corn, as a lot of alternative theorists would like us to believe, but they're actually images of other plants that are considered sacred to that culture. Corn imagery in Native American rituals and depictions of it, you see a lot of corn. When you get over into like the Hindu temples, where there are supposedly cobs of corn being held by the temple maidens,
right?
That's probably not corn, because all of the other plants in these carvings are actually plants that are used in ceremonies at those temples. And so the first thing that we should have said was, gee, that looks like corn. It should have been, what plant is that grows locally? And as soon as we start looking for that, we find that it's the whipcord lily, it's identical.
Well, let's go back to Roslin Chapel with its
Roslin Chapel, yeah.
Well, let's go back to Roslin Chapel with its Atlantean zipper technology. It's a minor motif. If this is some big friggin' deal that's like, by the way, we've colonized an entire continent, which makes our family the greatest thing ever. Why the hell? And I'm sure somebody will be like, well, it's hidden because like it's supposed to be a secret message. I'm like, yeah, you know what? Seriously, screw you. But it's like, it's some minor hidden thing. It reminds me of Top Prom, where we talked about how there's supposedly a stegosaurus on the building in one of the pictures of animals, and far more likely it's basically a boar or pig with vegetation behind it, just like the bird with vegetation behind it and the other animals vegetation behind it. And I'm like, if you're making a big deal about the fact that there's like a giant freaking reptile monster that nobody else has seen, I'm really glad that you're emphasizing it just as much as that stork that everybody can see over there. It's people literally finding things in if you take a look at inside Roslin Chapel, there's a vast amount of carving. This is a playground for apophenia. and pareidolia. The finding of patterns, which we've talked about before, it is a playground for that.
What's interesting too
Yeah.
is that the folks at Roslin Chapel actually brought in a botanist and said, okay, what are these plants that are all carved into, and is that corn? And his conclusion was that none of them are real. They're all kind of schematic. They're all kind of fantastic. And that of all the different plants, even the ones that you would expect to be there because they are in fact grow in Northern Europe, that's not what's being depicted, at least not accurately. And these guys, the sculptors, could have depicted these things accurately. So in other words, this is all kind of a fantasy. And so therefore, picking on the corn and saying, well, that is, even though it doesn't look exactly like corn, it must be corn, ignores the context of all of the other work.
One of the other things about Roslin Chapel, which I actually didn't know, I knew it was in the Da Vinci Code. I knew it was in all the Templar whatever of the late 20th century. I did not know that there were over 100 green men.
Oh,
these really awesome, playful green, these medieval figures. These kind of take on the wild man, but they've got like vegetative whatever. And I can only take this to mean that the famous Alan Moore comic Swamp Man is actual reality, and he lived in Scotland, because the corn is real, therefore the green men must also be real.
Right, you don't get to cherry pick on this. It's all either real or it's all made up.
No, I actually like that. That's a pretty solid theory going right there with the Swamp Man. Because, I mean, where else would you have a giant swampy dude?
Wait, whoa. I just made a major occultic cryptozoological breakthrough. Swamp Men, Scotland, I think they might be able to cash in further by saying Shrek lived there.
He does have a Scottish accent.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, yeah. Mm-hmm. And he lives in a swamp, doesn't he?
Imagine the dolls they could sell.
I'm just saying, Archie Fantasies making connections.
Yeah. We are scientists.
Now,
we are scientists making connections.
I hate to bring us back to the Zeno narrative, but there's actually a step in between in this Rube Goldberg story between the Zeno narrative and corn and the Roslin Chapel. And we're going to come. I think this is maybe Jeb's favorite topic. The Earl Henry Sinclair. Is he one of your faves?
I love Sinclair.
So I am only vaguely familiar with this, to be honest. So I cannot really comment on it, except to note. Go ahead. I have it. I know a little bit. I have a comment that I would like to make once you've put some more pieces on the board.
Sure. So here's the deal. The Zeno narrative was published in 1558. It's not until 1780 when a traveler and a travel writer, John Reinhold Forrester, says, this weird name Zishmini that they give to the prince in the Zeno narratives, because that name is unrecognizable in any language. And you know what it probably is? It probably is Henry Sinclair. It's a mistake. It's a fucked up version of Henry Sinclair. Now, God only knows how you get from Zishmini to Henry Sinclair, but this is the
there are some consonants in there, Ken.
I was gonna say it shares at least 3 letters in common.
They both have letters. They
were spoken by humans. They were spoken by humans.
I bet they were written. They were written at some point.
I'm not sure I can argue with that. That seems like a perfectly reasonable explanation. But here's where, and I think Jason has made this point, that there is this desire to believe it wasn't those swarthy Italian Columbus and the Spanish that they discovered America. We want it to be Anglo-Saxons. We want it to be the people up in Northern Europe. And so if you can make Zishmini actually be Henry Sinclair, by the way, no historian of Henry Sinclair ever suggested this guy was an explorer or a traveler. There's nothing until, maybe Zishmini is actually Henry Sinclair. And this is the secret and hidden history of this Scottish lord. Then in the 18th, so that's the 1780s. It's 90 more years before Richard Henry Major essentially rewrites the Zeno narrative so that it sounds like that Zishmini could be Henry Sinclair. And actually, if you look up the Zeno narrative online, there are versions of it in which they've completely replaced Zishmini's name and they just put Henry Sinclair's name, because that's how you do science.
Well, because obviously it's him, Ken. I don't understand why you can't see that. Also, how else would we have discovered America?
Exactly. But now here's the connection to Roslin Chapel. So Henry Sinclair, the number of steps is amazing, because not only do we have to accept that the Zeno narrative is legitimate after he ripped it up and then remembered it. He memorized it. He had an eidetic memory, or photographic memory, I guess.
Sure.
And not only do you have to replace all the names of all the places on the map to make it look like it's genuine cartographic depiction of the northern Atlantic, and not only do you have to kind of make up the idea that he went far enough west that he got to the New World, he then came back, and Henry Sinclair must have brought corn with him. This is, say we're looking at, the year is 1400 maybe, and then Henry Sinclair shares this corn with his grandson, who is William Sinclair. William Sinclair is the guy who designs the Roslin Chapel. And so the argument, if you follow all those steps, is that Zishmani is Sinclair. Sinclair made it to the New World, even though that's not what the narrative says. He came back with corn, showed it around, and his grandson incorporates a depiction of that corn that he brought back in the Roslin Chapel.
But make sure it's very obscure. Make sure it's very, very obscure.
And only on one window.
Yes. We've got a number of authors since then. Frederick Pohl is another one in the 1950s who claims that Sinclair was merely a mistranscription of Zishmani. Zishmani was a mistranscription of Sinclair, or maybe a mistranscription.
Frederick Pohl, the science fiction writer?
You got it. Frederick Pohl. Frederick Pohl was all about the Norse coming to the New World before Columbus, and he was all about diffusionism.
If he's all about the Norse, this is the one that always throws me off. This is why, I don't try to get too far into the whole Sinclair thing. But how do we get from the Norse finding America to Sinclair finding America? He's not Norse. He
has a Norse
Gaelic at best.
Sinclair has a Norse connection. The king of Norway and apparently Henry Sinclair were buddies, and he got certain titles from the king of Norway.
Is that real or is that made up? I can't even, that's the other problem with Sinclair. You can't tell what's real and what's not real with him anymore.
Well, yes. there is a lot of Norse influence, obviously, in the British Isles, et cetera, et cetera. Also, by the 19th and 20th century, the Vikings were white.
Yeah. Well, and it's also believable that somebody from that time period could be friends with someone else from that time period, and they could have shared information. But did they really?
Well, the thing too is that Sinclair is named the Earl of the Orkney Islands, and the Orkneys were they are part of Scotland today, but I think the Norse had claimed the Orkneys as well. And if there are the population of folks living on the Orkneys today, the Orkneys are way the hell far north. It's in the middle of winter, the sun is up for very few hours. So there is a real Norse presence on the Orkneys. So it's not surprising that this connection is made between Henry and the Norse.
Well, one of my favorite archaeological sites to show students is the Maze Howe chamber tomb.
Oh,
which,
yeah.
If I remember correctly, is Bronze Age, or very neatly, I think it's Bronze Age. It's a big chamber tomb, but in I believe the 12th century, a bunch of Norse crusaders took shelter in it and talked about it being like a treasure hoard. And there is a depiction that looks like maybe a dragon in there, and they left actually one of the most important repositories of Norse runic writing there, but it's graffiti. So some of it's like, oh, this guy's the greatest carver ever, and I carved this thing. I'm the greatest carver. Some of it's a lot ruder than that. Some of it's pretty much like bathroom graffiti today, which is the fact that that's a World Heritage Site is kind of friggin' amazing. But no, so I wouldn't be surprised of tying Norse people in, but also Vikings became, because it was plausible, as we now know they did, come to North America to at least some extent. They became kind of the well, can we please put white people here?
The white saviors, and that's why and the Heaven and Rune Stone and the Kensington Rune Stone and the Beardmore relics, all that is tied up with this same idea. Mm-hmm. But that's Henry Sinclair is going to be the Northern European who discovers America. And I
think after our break, there's one more piece of evidence, a stony and dubious piece of evidence that I think will complete the puzzle.
Sure.
Archaeology is a show about archaeology by the women of archaeology. An alternating panel of women archaeologists discuss the issues in archaeology that impact professionals and the public every day. Check out Women in Archaeology for a different perspective on the past today at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/WIA. Now let's get back to the show.
Your cardiologist knows your heart, and your mom knows how to mend your heart. Your ophthalmologist helps you see, and your best friend makes you feel seen. A visit to your physical therapist can heal your shoulder, and a visit to your grandma can heal your soul. Your health is a journey you don't take alone. Just like the people around you, all of us at Kaiser Permanente work together to help care for all that is you. Learn more at kp.org. Kaiser Permanente, for all that is you.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
And we are back, and Jeb, you left us with the tantalizing idea of our last key element to this mystery.
Well, I'd like Ken to to bring this into the era of chivalry with the Westford Knight.
Yes.
Westford Knight.
So here's the deal. The claim is made today. You will find claims made that in Westford, Massachusetts, which is about 50 miles outside of Boston, that there is, you archaeologists are looking for physical evidence. Well, God damn it, we have it right here in eastern Massachusetts. We have a petroglyph of, in fact, one of the knights working under the aegis of Prince Henry Sinclair. Here's the real deal. So it's 1873. There's a book published titled "A Gazetteer of the State of Massachusetts," and talking about one of the chapters talks about valuable rock types. Granite. There are granite quarries in New England. There are slate quarries. So this person, the author of the book, is talking about various minerals and rocks that are of value. And when he gets to Westford, this is what he says. And this is a quote: "The mineral called Andalusite," and Andalusite is a metamorphic mineral. So the mineral called Andalusite is found here, and an immense ledge which crops out near the center has upon its surface ridges furrowed in former times by glacial forces. There is upon its face a rude figure supposed to have been cut by some Indian artist. So here's somebody in 1873 talking about this exposed bedrock in Westford, and there are glacial striations. They use the term striations called furrows, but they understand what that means. The glacier overrode this rock, left these marks on the rock, but then mentions the fact that there is a rude figure, some sort of an image maybe left by the Indians. Now, most people think of rock art, they think of the American Southwest, but there's rock art all over North America, including in New England. We've mentioned Bellows Falls, I think.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned on our last episode, yes.
In Vermont.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeb, have you had an opportunity to see the Leo petroglyphs in Ohio?
I've only, where are they? In Ohio, obviously, but.
Yeah, I have to remember where.
All right, well, we'll look that up. No, I have not. Clearly, I have not.
Yeah, here's the weird deal, and this is obviously a paranormal experience that I had. On the last visit to Ohio, and I was driving from Serpent Mound, and I was listening to the radio, and they were talking about it's Petroglyph Day at the Leo Petroglyph site, a state site, a state historical society site open to the public. And I was like 20 miles away from it when I heard that. So of course I had to go see it. And it's actually pretty cool. There's a little bit of a roof built over it, so it's protected. The point here is it's not shocking that somebody in 1873 recognized that there maybe were some Indian petroglyphs there in Massachusetts. 10 years later, it's 1883, a book is published, The History of Westford, and this author says, referring to the same rock, a broad ledge which crops out near the house of William Kittredge has upon its surfaces grooves made by glaciers in some far-off geological age. Rude outlines of the human face have been traced upon it, and the figure is said to be the work of Indians. Now, the reason I quoted those is I want to make very clear, 1873, 1883, people are seeing this image and they both describe it as rude and crude, and you can't quite make out what the hell it is. Right. That's significant because if you turn the pages forward, turn the calendar forward to 1946, and you look at a book called The Ruins of Great Ireland in New England, written by William Goodwin, who is Mr. Mystery Hill. He is the guy who buys the site, reconstructs it in North Salem, New Hampshire, buys the site, reconstructs it because he knows it's Irish Chaldee monks, maybe 6th century, maybe 7th century. In that book, he provides some context. He talks about other sites in the New World that lend credence to his idea that Mystery Hill, now called America's Stonehenge, was constructed by European travelers and settlers in the New World long before Columbus. In that book, he has a drawing, not a photograph, but a drawing of that boulder. Only now, instead of the drawing depicting a rude figure that's kind of hard to make out, it is a very clear image of a sword. And it's done with the punch technique. In other words, you take a metal rod and somebody smacks it and you connect the dots and it looks like a sword. Goodwin goes beyond this, saying, well, it's only half a sword. So the sword actually being depicted is broken. And to Goodwin, that means a medieval knight died on that spot. Because after he dies, you break the sword. I have I don't know anything about medieval chivalry. I don't know if that's real or not.
I don't think.
Why not? Why not? I mean, clearly the philosophy here is not unlike Field of Dreams. If you build it when it's not there, people will make up additional shit about it later on.
There you go. But here's the thing: if there had been a sword in 1873 or 1883, people mentioning that rock's image would have said, that looks a hell of a lot like a sword. They don't. Sometime between 1883 and 1946. Somebody put the sword there. Because you can go there today and goddamn it, there's a sword there.
That's a really good use of timeline.
Archaeologists in time, who knew?
It's like we know how to do that. No, but here's my thing, like there's no body, there's no
Well, no, here's the deal. Wait. No, you have to let me finish, Sarah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So that's 1946. Now, William Goodwin, who accepts all of this stuff, if there had been anything other than that sword, he certainly would have depicted it in his book. It's not until the mid-1950s when another character enters the picture. His name is Frank Glynn. Frank Glynn was a longtime member of the Archaeological Society of Connecticut. That means that Frank Glynn and I have something in common. I am a longtime member of the Archaeological Society. It's a typical state organization made up mostly of amateur avocational archaeologists, but professionals in the state also are members. We have meetings twice a year. We publish a bulletin. There are newsletters. Glynn was not only a member in the 1950s, he was the president of the organization for a number of years. That's another thing I have in common with old Frankie boy. I was a president of the Archaeological Society. I never met him. He died before I arrived on the scene. Glynn arrives at Westford. He sees the rock, and lo and behold, through some amazing abilities, his amazing perceptive abilities, his amazing perspicacity, he not only sees a sword, he sees a whole goddamn knight holding the sword. The knight is wearing a helmet. He's wearing chainmail armor, and he's got a shield, and on the shield is a family crest. Oh. Nobody else has seen this thing. Frank Glynn, to help us all out, chalks in the image. If you go online and Google the Westford Knight, and if you see what very clearly looks like...
He drew on the rock? He drew on the actual rock with chalk?
That's exactly what he did.
Awesome.
That is exactly what he did. And so now if you look at images online of this image, that's what you're seeing. You are seeing either Glynn's original chalking job or somebody coming in and looking at his chalking job and re-chalking it.
I think that the Westford Knight was here to fight the Piazza bird we talked about in our cryptozoology and art.
It's entirely possible. And thank God, or we in New England would have been attacked by the Piazza bird. Now, here's just to finish the circle here, Sarah.
Okay.
Some people have looked at the family crest on that shield.
Oh,
they say,
God.
"Oh my God, that's Sir James Gunn's family. That's Clan Gunn. James Gunn, he was one of the knights working with Henry Sinclair.
Claire.
Therefore, ergo, physical evidence of the presence of Henry Sinclair in Massachusetts sometime in the late 1300s, because they left that image right there for us all to see.
What I like is this is now accepted as being a memorial image of Sir Gunn, and somehow poor Sir Gunn still doesn't even get credit for being in America before everyone else. It's still somehow Sinclair's credit to take. But I'm going to take a page from Jeb's book and link some other things together. We have a broken sword. We have the Beardmore relics, which are totally real. And if you can't hear the sarcasm in my voice, let me tell you how much sarcasm there is there. But those are found around the same area, I think.
No, those are up in Ontario. Beardmore relics, I thought, were in Ontario,
yes.
Canada. Yes.
Yeah, they're farther north. I mean, it's
just a little bit north.
Yeah.
I mean, distance means nothing in these things, so I'm just saying that broken sword is really exactly, because I'm pretty sure they don't line up time-wise either. But I'm going with the story of the Beardmore relics are actually poor Sir Gunn's sword, who still doesn't get credit for being in America first.
I know. It's Sinclair does. By the way, at the Westford Knight site, there is a stone monument telling the story of this was Gunn, and this is where Henry Sinclair passed through Massachusetts. But I think it's Nova Scotia. In one of the bays of Nova Scotia, there is a stone monument saying, "All right, this is the bay where Henry Sinclair entered into Canada."
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So it's like Prince Madoc in Mobile Bay in Alabama.
I was wondering how the two of these connected, like Prince Madoc and Sinclair.
Well, listen, man, the Atlantic was like a superhighway for all these explorers way back before Columbus.
But only if you were a prince. And this is my thing. So you guys
because Sinclair gets called Prince sometimes too, doesn't he?
Which one?
Sinclair. Sometimes he gets called.
Well,
Prince
I mean, it's
Sinclair,
a noble family. I mean, it's a noble family, whether it's a prince or not. It's they're definitely lords and all of that. And that's not my problem with that. That's more my observation on this is that the fact that like, oh, we have really not corn here in this guy, and therefore we have to find this guy here, and this guy works from. I mean, this is we talked about Zeno sounding like a supervillain. This is like superhero history or comic or Star Wars history where the same damn people keep showing up. You know, there's hundreds of millions of people on the planet, but it's got to be like this person and this person and this person, and you know, this monument has to be this specific moment in this knight's life and death, or the Kensington runestone has to tell a story about these specific people, and it's very dramatic, and it's not how shit works. You know, it's like, who was Columbus? A guy who did this thing. Who were his crew? Guys who did this thing. You know, did they know Queen Isabella? Yeah. Was it Queen Isabella's like noble family? No. And you see this time and again where you have this turn into a story, and you have these specific characters, and it's easier to follow them from a narrative perspective. And that's my, again, I am not an expert on the Sinclair stuff. I'm not interested in it. But that's what it seems like. It's like, it's just the same people here and here and here and here. Why not? Well,
I'm interested as to why, and maybe it does exist out there, but why the Prince Madoc figure has never been combined with the Sinclair character as well. Like I've always wondered why those two managed to stay different, even though
they're kind of similar.
Well, they're identical. I mean, Isn't Murdoch also a Gaelic prince or something like that? And that's like his big shtick is
he's
the
Welsh.
Celt.
Yeah,
he's Welsh.
But here, I want to defend Prince Madoc. At least in the case of Prince Madoc, there is a legend, there is a story that actually goes back several hundred years of him getting, it was an internecine fight between a couple of brothers for the throne. And it actually says Madoc and his people, they left in a boat and they were never seen again. We don't even have that for Sinclair. Sinclair doesn't freaking disappear off the edge of the earth sailing west of the Atlantic. So Madoc, of the two, I like the Madoc story better. Although, again, it's the fact that he arrived in the New World is completely made up, and it was made up by an English lord who wanted to assert British ownership of the New World. And he claimed, yeah, we own all of this, so all the way out to California, that's all ours because of Prince Madoc. So it was a political ploy.
And yet, if you travel around the South, especially the Deep South, you will find monument markers to Prince Madoc and his men as they traveled through the South. And almost every one of them corresponds with actual Native American earthworks that are being attributed to Prince Madoc.
And I think some of that ties into the Melungeon stuff that we've talked about with people trying to create European identities because of ancestry from the colonial kind of changing of. I'm not going to get into all. We've talked about that.
But there are all these claims of blue-eyed Indians, and even if you look historically, that when Native Americans in the Southeast were living in large communities that were well kept and well appointed with pathways that ran parallel and perpendicular, the argument was, well, Indians couldn't have done that. It must have been a European. These guys must be descendants of Madoc. So it's a lot of racist crap that's tied up with that argument.
But why didn't Madoc bring corn back?
Oh, he stayed. He never went
stayed.
Back.
That's why.
He liked corn. He liked corn so much he stayed here.
He just stayed here. He was like, I like corn. We got beans. I got squash. We're good.
This is entirely tangential. Well, not entirely tangential, but when I was a kid, I'm older than you guys. Mazola corn oil, which was obviously cooking oil made of corn, had the series of commercials, and their spokesperson was a woman who clearly looked to be Native American, and they dressed her up in like a blue work shirt and blue jeans, and she wore a squash blossom necklace and had extremely long black hair, and she would hold an ear of corn, and her saying was, "You people," meaning you white folks, "you people call it corn.
Oh yeah,
my people call it maize."
Yeah,
and that's what they got in Mazola.
That's still I think at least for people a certain age, you can still vaguely reference it with but we call it maize.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like the old what I forget what company it had that had the sort of the again very kind of racist and orientalist ancient Chinese secret as like it was I don't know if it was a frozen food or what it was, but they don't do that anymore. For I think fairly obvious reasons.
I remember an old commercial on late night television for Pearl Cream, and it was supposed to be the ultimate beauty cream, and that's why Asian women were so beautiful. And they always had like this gorgeous Asian woman, like you don't even know what version she is, but she's putting on this beautiful white cream, and they're like, and that's the Asian secret of beauty. And I'm just like, wow, really?
I've never heard that one before.
Yeah, it was on late night television.
One of the versions of this Mazola commercial, there she is in her squash blossom necklace, which is Navajo, and then at the very end, there's this little blow in the upper right hand corner of the screen is a guy dressed as a Plains Indian, and there's a drum in the background, and he's dancing and singing Mazola.
Oh Jesus!
No shit.
Okay, but before we change subjects again, if you go to the Smithsonian Museum of the Native American, they actually have Mazola corn oil and some depictions of the woman you're talking about. Because as soon as you mentioned that, we just went there this weekend, so you can go see some of the old advertisements where they were using Native American themes to sell products.
This stuff is historically important.
Yeah,
There's a reason it shouldn't be on TV now, but it's historically important.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, I think we have made a very solid argument for why that's not corn in the. Other than it's not corn in the Roslin Chapel.
And Sarah, do you want the angry descendants of Henry Sinclair to write you directly?
Oh, yeah, if you guys, I keep forgetting to do this. We have an email. You can contact us at our email. It's archyfantasies@gmail.com. It's ARCHY fantasies@gmail. But yeah, you can contact me, but follow the rules of engagement, be polite and be nice and don't have a swear word as your every other word, or else I'm probably just going to delete it and ignore you.
You could have also just said, yes, or may I please have another?
No. I don't do angry emails. I just don't. If it looks too angry to me, I get rid of it.
The subject line is the key for me. If any of the George Carlin words that you couldn't say on TV back in the 1970s are in the subject line, I don't read the email.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, if people want to send comments or questions or show suggestions, go ahead and send it to the ArchaeFantasies Gmail. Thanks for reminding me.
Yes, absolutely. And
so, guys, thank you much for the show. Final thoughts on Sinclair?
Was fun.
Did we talk about our corn preferences like we did with the sweet potato?
I don't like corn.
No?
No, I'm not a corn fan.
I'm not as much as I used to be.
I don't know, man. You take an ear of corn, leaving all the foliage on it, peel it off, put some butter and garlic salt on it, cover it all up, and you cook that in a fire. That's good eating.
No, it is. I will say this. I used to love corn on the cob. I eat it a lot less now. And I think that's partly because of just changes in my diet. And also, I hate having to floss right after because it just drives me mad.
I think that's something I don't like.
Popcorn's the same thing. Love eating popcorn and God, fine. But yeah, no, I think we're all probably on a similar page.
But
it's butter and salt.
There you go. But it's important, I think, on a serious note, if you go to the website of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and every year I think they update the list of the 50 most important crops. That is, in terms of at least the number of millions of bushels that are produced each year. Yeah. And corn is way the hell up there on the top, both as food directly for people, but also as silage, as food for animals.
Oh, so food for animals and used for other things, and of course it's also used as a fuel. This is not an advertisement for the maize
for
production.
The corn industry.
But I think
nonetheless, it is an important crop.
Extremely important. I think sugar, believe it or not, is like number one. But then when you look at real food crops, corn is higher than most of the plants domesticated in the old world in antiquity. Corn has more significant impact on world diet than barley or oats or rye.
No, it's really damn important, which is why they hid it obscurely in Roslin Chapel.
Right, exactly.
Behind Atlantean zippers.
Atlantean zippers.
You open the zipper, and there's the corn.
And next episode, we're talking about Atlantean zippers. Well, thanks, guys.
Absolutely.
I'll talk to you later.
Absolutely. Bye. All right. Bye-bye.
Rate your trials as one will call. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
Thanks for listening. We hope you've enjoyed it. Our music was provided by Archaeosuit Productions. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Stitcher and share us wherever you use social media. You can contact us with your questions, comments, or angry email at archaefantasies@gmail.com. You can follow the podcast at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archaefantasies. You can follow the blog at www.archaefantasies.com and get updates on Tumblr and Twitter at ArchaeFantasies. You can also look for us on Facebook. If you're looking for the show notes for this episode, go to the podcast website at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/ArchaeFantasies. Thanks again for listening.
No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. We don't do dinosaurs.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and edited by Chris Sims.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.